We perhaps create an opportunity to go a bit deeper and a bit more in depth in some of these questions than either panel formats or just standard speeches always allow. Randi Weingarten, of course, is the president of the American Federation of Teachers. She's been in that role since 2008. The AFT has 1.5 million members across the United States. Before becoming AFT president, Randi was president of the United Federation of Teachers, the AFT's largest local in New York with 200,000 members. She was in that role from 1996 to 2008. And before that, she was counsel to former UFT president Sandy Feldman. In 2013, Randi was named by New York Observer as one of the most influential New Yorkers of the past 25 years. She was also named by Washington Life as one of its 100 individuals on its 2013 Power List. Randi has a little bit of clout, and pretty much up and down the East Coast. The way this is going to work today is she's going to take about 20 or 25 minutes. I had to take a chance to frame the conversation for today, put some thoughts out there. She and I are then going to have a conversation for about 20 or 25, and we're then going to open it up to questions from the audience and from those folks following online or watching the live stream. When we go to Q&A, as always, I will ask that folks actually ask questions. If we get 15 seconds in and I don't see a question in sight, we're going to go ahead and give somebody else a chance. So please be forewarned. Please make sure your cell phones are not ringing. If you're following this online, the hashtag on Twitter is hashtag AFT at AEI. That's hashtag AFT at AEI. During the Q&A, my colleague Mike McShane is going to be monitoring the Twitter feed. So if you want to fire in questions via Twitter, we will absolutely try to make sure that the best ones get a chance to be part of the conversation. The full video will be posted online tomorrow on the AEI website. And keep in mind, for those of you who are following higher ed developments as well, that my colleague Andrew Kelly and my colleague Alex Pollack are hosting an event on student loans information next week. You can find information out in the foyer. It's been an interesting week in the questions of teacher quality. Just last week, of course, a California judge weighed in on the Vergara lawsuit, finding for the plaintiffs. Secretary of Education Arne Duncan commented that the court decision is a mandate to fix these problems. His hope, he said, was that today's decision moves from courtroom towards a collaborative process in California that is fair, thoughtful, practical, and swift. Every state, every school district needs to have that kind of conversation. I was somewhat less sanguine on the decision of Vergara. Randi, in an open letter to Duncan, wrote that this week we needed your leadership to demonstrate that teacher and student interests are aligned, but instead you added to the polarization. And it's something I'm particularly hoping that we'll get a chance to chat about a bit. Earlier this month in an interview with BuzzFeed, Randi said that the right's vitriol is ideological, the losing of parents and teachers is a matter of incompetence. And as one of those folks on the right, I'm curious to have a chance to talk about some of these questions of ideology and vitriol. With that, let me make sure I hand it over to Randi, and we will go ahead and get started.
Okay, I'm short. So it's great to be here. Let me just figure out if I can do the microphone. Can you still hear me if I move it this way? So I was with Lou Dobbs last night, and I'm at AEI today. God only knows where I'll be tomorrow. But the point is, if you don't have these dialogues, if you're just speaking to the same people you always speak to, we're not going to break through. And if we don't break through, we're not going to have a country that actually is one who believes in the American dream. And so I really admire Rick for always wanting to have these dialogues, and I really thank you for it. And I think that the principle of open debate and free flow of ideas, which AI is known for, is a really important principle in the civic discourse of our country, and I wish more people would opt for it. So really, thank you, Rick, very, very much. You could all clap for Rick. That's okay. You need me to do it this way? Is that better? Can you hear me now? Not that I can see my notes anymore. So, you know, this notion of free and open debate, that is actually a notion that's embedded in the AFT. And you can see it and hear it by, you know, our different leaders saying different things and engaging in that kind of debate. Now, I guess I should tell you, we're a union of 1.5 million professionals that include K-12 teachers, support staff, early childhood educators, higher education faculty and staff, nurses, healthcare workers, and public employees. And you can imagine, we certainly have our share of vigorous debate, and we will have our real share of vigorous debate at our convention this summer. I have promised that we're going to have at least an hour debate on the Common Core on the floor of our convention. But in New York, and I am still a proud New Yorker, even though I work in Washington, D.C., in New York, we call debate conversation. So we think that this is the way you actually, you know, do this work, but we also do it with our hands. Sorry. But let me be serious for a minute. So I bet if you didn't read the West Virginia newspapers, it would surprise you that our union is leading public-private partnerships in West Virginia's poorest county, where we're working to disrupt the multi-generational scourge of poverty by focusing on health, education, recreation, job creation, telecommunications, and all sorts of other things. How many people actually knew that we were doing that in this room? Okay, about 5. We just announced that AT&T had dedicated $300,000 to create an internship and mentoring program for students in McDowell, the name of this county, who are at risk of dropping out from high school. And it's really remarkable when you go and you see the kind of work that these mentoring programs do and what it means to the kids that are involved. It's frankly, for me, life-changing for me. And Gail Manchin, just this week, who happens to be the head of the state school board and also the chair of our private-public partnership, she wants to take the community hub model that we developed in McDowell and now make it an anchor for other counties in West Virginia. Same thing in terms of New York City. Bill de Blasio just announced that he wants to take that hub model that New York City imported from Cincinnati and extend it to 40 more schools. Second, would it surprise you that our union created and is now running one of the fastest growing online education companies in the United States of America, called Share My Lesson? Does that surprise? Do people know about Share My Lesson? Raise your hands. Who knows about Share My Lesson? Okay, about a quarter of the room. So Share My Lesson is an online platform that puts teachers and other people's best ideas in the reach for free of any educator, any parent, with thousands of lessons now aligned to the Common Core. And within 2 years, July is going to be the 2-year anniversary of Share My Lesson. There are over 500,000 users and 6 million downloads, including 250,000 downloads of lessons that were created under the auspices of the AFT Innovation Fund that are aligned with the Common Core, something that Ann Bradley, who's here, just told me today. So it's taking the idea about an innovation fund, which is sparking other ideas, and putting those lessons out on Share My Lesson, which is now being used by over 500,000 people. In fact, because of this, and this actually surprised me, I was named by one of the magazines as one of the top 10 people leaders in ed tech. Not for profit, for free. Third piece, and this I'm sure will surprise virtually everyone in this room. Would it surprise you that we are leading a partnership under the auspices of the Clinton Global Initiative and other unions to invest $10 billion of public pension funds in a sound fiduciary way to fix crumbling infrastructure, create jobs, and deliver solid returns? How many people knew that we were doing that? That's what I thought. And next week, we'll be making a big announcement about this because we have already raised $8.4 billion, and now a little bit more than that, and we've already, through this process, created over 30,000 jobs. Now, why do I raise all three of these things? I'm not doing an infomercial. I'm raising it because what you know is what Karen Lewis said sometime a few weeks ago, or what you know is about the Vergara case. What you know is about the polarization that goes on in the United States of America as opposed to the creative, innovative things that we're trying to do to champion fairness, democracy, economic opportunity, high-quality public education, healthcare, and public services for our students, their families, and our communities. A notion ripped right out of our mission statement. That's frankly what I think about all the time. I think about what can we do through community engagement, through organizing, through collective bargaining, through political activism, and especially through the work our members do to actually do something good for children, for families, and communities. That's who we are as the AFT at our core, the nexus of two important institutions, the labor movement and our system of public education, and trying to figure out how to use our collective knowledge and power to raise a country up and to grow our economy and individual opportunity. So when somebody starts saying to me that presenting unions in public education as an either or problem or solution, you can have that conversation. That's not the conversation I'm going to have. You want to arrive at whatever conclusions you arrive at? My grandmother used to have a saying, sei gesund. That's for you to do. For me, when you argue, when anybody keeps on arguing about whether or not we should exist, you're arguing against the fact that at this moment in America, educator density in unions is larger than in any other industry. So regardless of where you stand on issues like Harris v. Quinn or agency fee or things like that, there is something about educators wanting to join and be in unions. So you can argue about that, but educators want it. Maybe it's not 99%, maybe it's 50%, maybe it's 40%, but there's a lot of educators that want and feel like they need to have a union. But more importantly, when people on the outside world argue about this, all that energy that's being used to argue about that is not being devoted to actually help children succeed. And that probably is the most important point that I'm going to make. I am not, regardless of whether I'm a Democrat or a member of the Working Families Party, I never came to Washington to say there shouldn't be conservatives in the debate or libertarians in the debate. Everybody in America belongs in the debate. That's our democracy. We should relish that. And what I'm asking people on the other side is don't have that debate with the teachers in America either. Let them decide whether they want to have unions or not. Let's have the debate about what we need to do and then how to do it. Now, why do I feel this passionately about education. So I grew up as a daughter of a public school teacher. I learned early. I watched my mom every single day, basically grade her papers till late at night. She never came home till 5 or 6 in the evening. She's always focused on school and always focused on her kids. And frankly, I saw the same thing when I was a classroom teacher, even though I was also still the lawyer for the teachers union. Every Sunday, every Saturday, till late at night, I basically kept thinking about my kids. And when I get really, really, really depressed, if I feel like what is the path forward, what I see when I close my eyes is my kids at Clara Barton High School. And the picture I really see is the days that they actually won competitions on civics and in the Bill of Rights, and watching their faces in terms of their accomplishments. So I ask the following 3 questions every day. Is what we're doing good for kids? Is what we're doing good for families? Is what we're doing good for communities? And I start with a vision for public education. I think that vision begins with the promise of an America where parents can send their children to collaborative, welcoming, and safe neighborhood public schools that focus on children, not testing. I think we should have multiple pathways, and people who want other choices, they have a right to have other choices, but our obligation in terms of the public is making sure every child has a great public school available to him or her. But it's not just public schooling. A vision of America's education also means that we give kids the advantage of college education without becoming disadvantaged in the process. In the last century, when we thought that high school education was really important, what did we do? We made it free. Now we keep saying that higher education is important, and what is happening is that kids are being saddled with debt like never before. As a college graduate, debt shouldn't load down or shouldn't weigh you down in the future. What are we supposed to be doing in schools? I think a good education should be preparing kids not just for career and college, but for life and citizenship. And what, if you distill it down to its essence, we want students to be able to build relationships with themselves and with adults. We want them to acquire deep knowledge and learn how to apply it. And we want students to be persistent, to learn how to make mistakes and you don't have to learn how to make mistakes, but when you make mistakes, to learn how to keep trying and to develop that persistence. And frankly, if we could put a little bit of joy back into schooling, that would be pretty good too. And I would say we want all this for all students, regardless of geography or demography. And so that's kind of sort of what our Reclaim the Promise agenda is. I'm not going to read it to you. We have these nice little palm cards, but we have strategies around the issue of teacher quality, curriculum, social, emotional health, and other kinds of things that impact kids. We have strategies around discipline, around prison pipeline, around early childhood. You know, we could go through all of that, but I do think it gets distilled to how do you help all kids get prepared for life and citizenship, career, college, and how do you help them develop relationships, become critical thinkers and problem solvers, and develop persistence. And so I think when we look in the mirror, as I did this morning, can we say that we were doing that for all kids today in our public schools? And the answer is no. But we're not doing that today for all kids in our private schools or our parochial schools, or our charter schools. But our goal has to be, we have to do it. And we can come up with all the reasons why. Look, too many schools lack libraries, lack the arts, lack basic supplies. Too many schools these days are test prep institutions where testing gobbles up the time better spent for teaching and learning. Too many schools focus on tests and sanctions that many times sap creativity rather than focusing on improvement and support and the path to dreaming and achieving dreams. And frankly, that brings me to Vagara. So in my judgment, while Vagara, I don't have to tell you what Vagara is, right? If I ask you what Vagara is, every hand will go up. So, what's Vagara? Everybody know about Vagara? I should say, who doesn't know about Vagara? So think about what I just said about the three things we're doing that are pretty innovative, and about Vagara, and everybody knows about Vagara. So, in my judgment, while the Vagara case diagnosed the right problem, it came to the wrong solution. And why do I say that? The Vagara case was saying, we have to help all children, particularly at-risk kids and particularly kids who are poor. Someone on Twitter this week said, and rightly so, don't say poor kids, say kids who are poor. And so the question I think Vagara was trying to ask is, how do you get the best teachers into the schools with the highest need, and how do you get them to stay? And how do you turn around those schools so those become schools where parents want to send their kids, educators want to work, and kids are really engaged? Where kids get up and say, I want to go there, I want to go to school. Where educators say, I want to be at that school. Where parents say, I'm going to do everything in my power to keep that school open. Those are schools that you want. So I do probably have to make the infomercial that says, no teacher wants an ineffective teacher in the classroom. And no one believes, or at least my union doesn't believe, that tenure should be a job for life, or that tenure should be an excuse for managers not to manage, or a shield of incompetence. And I think that if we go through questions, you'll see that we walk this walk all the time and have done so since 2010 in a whole bunch of different places. And frankly, I get criticized a lot on my Twitter feed and other places because I say this all the time, including to my members last summer, where we got a standing ovation at our Teach conference when we said, tenure cannot be a job for life. Yes, it's really important, but equally important is if someone can't teach after they've been helped, they can't be in our profession. That's our value system. But I would also argue that due process for teachers is important for kids, families, and communities. Because what due process allows is for teachers to stand up for kids and not be subject to retaliation. It allows teachers to be creative and use their professional judgment and training to do what they need so that kids can have access to opportunity. And frankly, even if the tenure law in California changed to where it is in most states on the East Coast, basically 3 years, how will that solve the questions I just asked in terms of making sure schools that at-risk kids go to have the teachers that they need? That's the problem we need to solve. We need to overcome poverty. We need to deal with equity. And so I would argue that there are better ways to move forward, collaborative, solution-driven ways. I was just up in New Haven yesterday, and we were there for the AFL-CIO, for an AFL-CIO meeting, but Garth Harries, the superintendent, met me at the meeting. And all of a sudden, all these people started taking pictures of us. And he got a little concerned because All we wanted to do was have a conversation about how to move forward. In New Haven, who has used collective bargaining to reform teacher evaluation processes to support struggling teachers and help all teachers improve throughout their careers. I just saw Mary Catherine Ricker walk in. In St. Paul, Minnesota, the St. Paul teachers with the community not only negotiated a new contract that made early childhood education important, that made sure that there were nurses and guidance counselors in schools, but they did this in a way to make sure that kids had a decent shot in life. And the same is true in New York City. After 5 years of lots and lots of pain, the new contract creates career ladders, creates lots of different opportunities to align teaching and learning conditions with student needs in a way like the school that I started with Steve Bard does, a school called Uni Prep in the South Bronx, which graduation I will be at this Saturday, and which has now had, for the third year in a row, a 96% graduation rate, 100% graduation rate, and another 100% graduation rate of kids who are all at risk. And every single one of them are going to college, every single one, for the last 3 years, or at least for the last 2 years. So that's what we're trying to do. Fix, not close schools like we did in New York City with the Chancellor's District through an agreement with then Mayor Rudy Giuliani and then Chancellor Rudy Crew. And what we did with the strategies we figured out was we turned around every single school, elementary school, within a year or two. That's how I think you solve problems, not by stripping teachers of their rights and their voice, but by figuring out these strategies that are going to ensure that kids get the teachers that they need, who will stay in schools, who will create collaborative, welcoming, safe environments with rich curriculum and with the wraparound services to address other needs. So I can go on and on. I just saw Mr. Hess look at his watch, so I won't do the second piece of the speech that I was going to do, except to say the following. We don't do this in isolation. And I was going to show you 2 slides, which I'll just quickly show, just in terms of seeing what we are all faced with. Slide number 1. I told you I shouldn't have gotten that award for tech ed. Is it here or is it not here? Well, since it doesn't seem to be here. So, slide number 1 was going to tell you that in the last 40 years, there has been a period of great wealth accumulation by the top 1%. Frankly, it's the greatest wealth accumulation since the Gilded Age, and it tracks almost exactly with the decline in union density. And slide number 2 is that nearly half of American households have no savings in their retirement accounts. And for the other half, the savings are unevenly distributed. The top 1% of households have more than 1.3 million in their retirement accounts, and the bottom, everyone else, the average is $12,000 in their retirement accounts. Now, the reason I want to end with this is that none of us live in a vacuum. That if we do not solve some of these economic problems, bigger economic problems, and the labor movement was part of that solution, and I think remains part of that solution, we will, even if we get everything in education right, we will not be a country like we were in the 50s, or a country in the 60s that started believing in civil rights. We will not be able to create and maintain a ladder of opportunity and the American dream. That, my friends, is our collective challenge. Not just the engagement in ensuring that public education can be the best it can be, but what are we going to do to make sure that this country once again becomes the land of opportunity where if you work hard and play by the rules, you have a shot in America. Thanks very much. I gotta get my watch, I gotta get my...
That's right.
In the middle? Right there. See, I should have worn a black shirt. Get your tie. And if anyone needs a palm card, I have many of them. Yeah, no, there was supposed to be two of them.
Okay. Hey, so
But
Randy.
this is what teachers do. We
accommodate-
improvise. When it doesn't happen, you do something
You
else.
fly with it. So, actually, so let's start with one of the points you made, because it seems to me, as I listened to you, I said, yeah, that makes a lot of sense when you're talking about, for instance, the reaction to Vergara.
Sorry,
that-
I just got my coffee all over. I'm gonna use one of my palm cards
There
as
you
a
go.
placemat.
Beautiful. That, you say, look, once somebody deserves a chance to show that they can improve, and if they don't, they deserve to be out of the profession. And it seems to me that most reformers are comfortable with that formula, but at the same time, they get enormously nervous that the union is saying these things but doesn't really mean it. Is that a fair critique? And if it's not a fair critique, where does it come from?
So, I think the answer is yes and no. Some people mean it, some people don't mean it. And so it really becomes a matter of creating that trust. I think what you see in our union, and I can't, look, unions, I love this. Unions are not monolithic. We do have 1.5 million members, and they are, one of the things I love about our members is they are not shy about at least talking amongst ourselves about what they like and what they dislike. And so what I think happens, Rick, is that some people start with, on a trust basis, on a collaboration basis. Well, let me say it this way. Some people think about a glass of water as half full, and some people think about it as half empty. So the people who think about it as half full, you start thinking about what can you do to actually make that goal a reality. And sometimes it's legislation, and sometimes it's contracts, and sometimes it's a lot of other things, but you're always thinking about things like quality, equity, and fairness. And some people will come to a debate and say, no, I remember what you did 18 years ago, and I still don't trust you about that. And so I remember a very profound superintendent in New York City who has since died, Chuck Schoenhout, who used to say, you can actually make rules for the exception, or you can make rules for the norm. And often what happens is our debates are about the exception and not the norm. And so that's why I say, you'll see that somebody will say, no, like, they'll make a rule for the exception as opposed to a rule for the norm. And so I think what you're seeing on both sides is if there was more trust, that there would be more of this work done, because most of the work starts after the agreement is reached. whether it's the legislative agreement or whether it's an, law or whether it's policy, the work starts when the pronouncements end. And that's where trust becomes really important.
And this is always, an awkward conversation with either you or Dennis Van Roykel, because obviously you got, many of the California districts are not even AFT, so we're talking about this at a high level. But, that disjuncture between kind of word and deed on either side, potentially, is, I'm somebody who, says, okay, what you're saying makes a lot of sense to me. I firmly believe that lots of your members believe that as well. But the fact pattern in California is there's 275,000 teachers, 2 a year are removed for performance issues on average. The superintendent of LA testified it costs between $250,000 and $500,000 to move out one tenured teacher. And to me, I'm saying, all right, I don't want to necessarily dredge up ancient history, but it seems to me that the facts on the ground don't reflect what we're talking about as a reasonable and healthy system.
So, and I don't, look, I think when you see and I saw this, frankly, in the news, so let me talk about it from the places where I had responsibility. I saw it in New York City. When it took too long and there were too many appeals and things like that, every single contract I negotiated, and now that Michael Mokel negotiated, has changed the tenure rules. Every single one of them, from 1987 on. And we kept on trying to solve problems, including in 2005, over Klein's objections. We actually tried to close the rubber room 2005, 2006, 2007, by actually making the processes both fairer and faster. Because there's no justification on earth that somebody is appealing a dismissal charge for 10 years. I don't care what it is. There's no justification for that. And bad facts make bad law. Having said that, there were also lots of other pieces of evidence in that trial, like several superintendents actually saying they can use the tenure laws perfectly fine, that they end up being able to manage perfectly fine. There were 2 or 3 other superintendents. There were several teachers who some of the plaintiffs actually had, who testified, who had gotten awards as teachers. So all I'm saying is there's going to be an appeal of this case. There's going to be, it's hard to know from looking at the transcripts now, I wasn't in the courtroom, what really are the facts of the ground. Having said that, look at what we've done in a bunch of places on the East Coast. New York changed its evaluation system and aligned its evaluation system with due process. Connecticut did the same thing. Maryland did the same thing. Illinois did the same thing. And so in these states, even though no doubt somebody's going to file a lawsuit, the decisions, even on the trial level, will be very different. And my concern is, so you deal with some of these issues. And, I hope that people in California will deal with them. I was at the LA Times editorial board last week, and I said that I hope that people will deal with them. We've dealt with them in lots of different ways in New York and other places, and we have lots of different suggestions to make laws both fair and fast, and to focus on quality, equity, and fairness. But the bigger issue is the one I just raised, which is if you're about helping kids get a decent education, you also have to deal with that half our new teachers leave within 5 years. That we have to, particularly in high-need schools, how do we create a culture where people go, stay, and become lifelong learners, and kids actually have the teachers that they need as well as the other resources. So that's, I think, the lesson I would like to take from Vergara. And frankly, what I would say to superintendents in California is, why don't you work with unions right now on this, like ABC School District has done, and frankly, like LA has done in some places, like San Francisco has done, like Poway has done, and let's work on some of that stuff together.
And, the ABC district, for instance, I think the AFT has done a nice job of recognizing some of some of the valuable work they've done, like you have with New Haven. Do you guys, do you do it and not get attention for it, or should you do more to call out districts for management's being irresponsible? If you feel that, look, it's management's job to move people out, they're not doing it, what is the union doing to help make sure that the profession is getting policed?
So there are places, I think the answer is we actually call it out. Let me say it this way. Remember the 3 questions I asked earlier about things that we're doing that really cut against the grade and cut against conventional wisdom, and how few people know about it. Now, it's not as if I'm not prolific on Twitter. It's not as if I don't, somebody just laughed, that I don't talk about at least one of these issues every week. But I think it's not what's said, it's what's heard, which was, I remember when I taught, it's not what's said, it's what's heard. It's how you engage kids where they are, not where you want them to be, and you try to help lift, right? So I think that the best ways of going about this is when you have odd bedfellows doing it together. I think there's going to be a lot more traction when someone in management calls out somebody in management, and there's a lot more traction when we do things like Toledo did, or like Minneapolis and St. Paul have done in terms of peer intervention and peer review programs. And frankly, we're willing to take that more and more of that responsibility again. We're willing to revisit peer intervention and peer review programs. We're willing to be those kind of partners sharing responsibility, because it doesn't help anyone. It doesn't help the teacher that's not doing a good job. It doesn't help kids. It doesn't help her colleagues. And so we want to take more and more of that responsibility.
So we'll shift gears in just one sec, but in light of this, early last month, the New York Post reported that your successor at the UFT, Michael Mulgrew, had told a gathering of UFT leadership, we're at war with the reformers. Their ideas will absolutely destroy, forget about public education, they will destroy education in our country. He said of slow walking efforts on evaluation, it was a strategy to gum up the works because we knew what their lawyers were trying to do. So curious, when these things get out there, how does that speak to this question of cooperation or trust or finding common ground?
So I think if you actually so number one, let me just say that whatever Michael said was said in the middle of a private union meeting. Now, I know the UFT, you got 3,000 people in the room, probably NSA is taping every other word, nothing is private, right? But if you have a meeting that is set as a union meeting, just like, if you had a board meeting that was a confidential board meeting, you would not expect that anybody actually would use whatever was said in that meeting. And that meeting was done. Michael did that meeting in the context of comparing and contrasting the kind of reforms that were built into the new UFT Board of Education contract versus what had happened beforehand in that context. So I read the transcript, I wasn't there, I could actually say, no, he didn't quite say that, he said this and this and this, but this is from his perspective. Everything, and I remember it from New York City, everything was a war. And everything was done to undermine what he was doing from the moment that I left. And what you see over and over again is this relentless strategy, whether people agree to it or not. Starve the schools, relentlessly criticize them, demonize the people who work there, marginalize those who fight back, all the while peddling private alternatives. And that was what he was commenting on. And, so everybody, when we talk to our members, we talk in all sorts of ways, and he's very honest about what has been faced. And frankly, I think the contract that the UFT just negotiated and that just was ratified by over 70%, 77% of the members is an amazing education reform an innovation contract. All the things that.
What in particular would you say that about?
So number one, there's a career ladder program that's built in if schools are willing to agree to do it. Remember what I said, if schools. That means teachers, parents, and administrators. There is, lots of people have talked about how we need to make contract conditions more flexible, more geared to what students' needs are. There are over 200 schools that can be eligible for all sorts of waivers of contract and state law if the educators, parents, and administrators not only agree to it, but say what it is about. Those two are anchors, a part of the new contract. This notion of having the time. We talk a lot about if you want to do something new curricularly or standards, you have to have the time for teachers to work with each other. It builds that into the contract. And it also builds in time to work with parents, to really work with parents, to align what one's doing. So there's 4 or 5 things there that are the anchors. Those are the anchor educational conditions in that new contract. And so I think it was a compare and contrast statement. Now, would I have said everything that Michael said? We're different people. Would I say everything that anybody in this room says? Probably not. Are there statements that any of you can find that say, where I said I said things that I regret? Absolutely. But ultimately, the context in New York is that there have been, and I saw it, and I was, given a steady diet of it, of people who just basically want to undermine the existence.
The existence of?
Of unions, and have that kind of personal fight. The stuff that people, that some of the reformers have done to Michael personally are really wrong.
So let's pivot to another fight that's been brewing in New York, the Common Core effort. Last week, Vicki Phillips from the Gates Foundation suggested a 2-year moratorium on consequences for Common Core assessments. This was pretty much what you had suggested in spring of 2013.
Right.
You also, when the Common Core was unveiled, celebrated it as, June 2010 as essential building blocks for a better education system. But last year, you suggested that, you said to the Post, you think Obamacare implementation is bad. The implementation of the Common Core is far worse. So there's a lot of moving pieces here.
Right.
Where are you at on the Common Core, and how do you make sense of it, and what do you think of Vicki Phillips' suggestion? So
I actually, if you think about all those statements, they're pretty consistent, which is, I am a big believer in it, and I am for the following reasons. I was a lawyer before I was a teacher, so I had the opportunity to learn and to practice the Socratic method. I was also a litigator. And that tool actually helped me more than virtually any of the other tools I had for teacher prep in teaching my kids civics and the Bill of Rights. And when I looked at the original standards in the Common Core, the going for deeper knowledge and deeper learning, and for applying facts, and for not just knowing things, but trying to come up with problem solving and critical thinking, what it took me back to is in the 90s when I taught my kids at Clara Barton High School. I only taught African American and Latino kids. I watched my kids go from hating me because I was too hard on them, hating the work that I threw at them, hating the Dr. Casey and myself for, in their AP government class, for making them really try to understand the Sixth Amendment and the Fifth Amendment and equal protection and reasonable search and seizures and civics and on, to this transition that they made, this transformation that they made, virtually all of them, to learning how to debate and feeling their own self-confidence and self-esteem grow through that transition from I can't do it, I'm not quite sure how to say this in English, no, 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 to yes, I can. And that has made me a true believer in if we get the strategies right for how we touch kids intellectually and how we get them to believe in themselves and in their own capacity to learn and to overcome their resistance to it, then kids can seize their lives. And so frankly, that's what I saw when I first saw the first standards in English language arts. I'm not a math person, but when math people talk to me, as in even back to the TIMS study, when people think about thinking math, sorry.
Oh, no, so given that, I'm curious, what is it that had you so concerned last fall, so troubled about the implementation? And are you still as concerned as you were in the fall?
I am, and I am. Because think about the difference. So I just made an argument about why we need them. But it is, and I also made the argument about the skills that I had as a lawyer and a litigator that helped me do that teaching hopefully effectively, right? So how do you do that transition? And too often people just say the pronouncement is the reform. And in the political world we're in, if we can't get it done within a 2-year or 4-year cycle, then it doesn't work. And so the pronouncement isn't the reform, it's the first step. The reform is actually the implementation and the transition and getting the support right and managing that. And what's happened in New York is it has been botched, not in every place. There are places like the Nest School, like IS 52. I've spent a bunch of time in different schools where you see the alignment between standards and curriculum and professional development and people robbing Peter to pay Paul to find the time to do this. But in the main, and I see it upstate New York, it's been botched. And John King never takes responsibility for that. And that's wrong.
And are you suggesting it's botched only in New York, or is that a microcosm for
No,
your
I think in
nationally?
some places, like in California actually did this more right. Montana did this more right than other places. What did California and Montana do? So Torlakson and Jeannot, they're two superintendents. They basically said, Torlakson said to Governor Brown, you have to put money into this. Because the other thing that they did in New York is, remember, there was a tax cap and there were budget cuts, and this required money for training. And so where was that money taken from? Art, music, at the same exact time as there were other budget cuts. So what Brown did was say, okay, we're going to put $1.5 billion here, separate and apart from everything else. And we're also going to give the time to actually make this work for the alignment, for teachers to get a sense of what they're doing, and then to actually see it work in action with children, and then do some pilot testing and things like that. And in some ways, so that's what I said last year, and in some ways that's what the Business Roundtable, the Gates Foundation, Learning First Alliance have all said a year later. Wait a second, if you really want this to work, you got to do not only the adjustments, but you have to give people the time to actually learn what we're saying is a really important new strategy for deeper learning for children.
So what do you say to Common Core advocates who kind of give a world-weary sigh and say, look, not unreasonable, but this feels like the same old song. We need more money, we need more time, and we're skeptical of any consequences being attached.
So I could be sarcastic and cynical, or I could be real. Because every time, I mean, what I remember from my mom, from her friends, is they used to tease, and this is in the 1960s and the 1970s, about having the education fad of the month, or the fad of the year, and that educational strategies would come and go, would never be given the time to take root, and something didn't happen right, and they would go bye-bye. And so when I hear that as a criticism, I'm like, okay, if this is really important, are we going to give it the time, give teachers the tools, and make sure there's the trust to make it real? And I've watched enough districts like New Haven, like what we did with the Chancellor's District, like ABC School District, like St. Paul, like Cincinnati. I've watched enough districts actually, when they roll up their sleeves and do it together, they still have fights, but there's an underlying trust that then builds on each other. So my response to the Common Core advocates is, if this is real, stick with it and do the adjustments we need to do to actually make it real. And maybe we'll know how much money it costs. I don't think anybody knows how much it costs, but you can't rob Peter to pay Paul. You can't actually take away music from kids, or nurses from kids, or guidance counselors from kids, because you want to say we're complying with the Common Core. And so some people may be using this and just not meaning it. But frankly, most teachers I know in the United States of America want their children to succeed and believe in deeper learning and critical thinking. So this is like one of those, forks in the road.
So let's go ahead and open this up for questions. While we do that, Max and Sarah will have mics. Again, please catch their eye. Please identify yourself by name and affiliation, and please ask a question. If we get 15 seconds in, I don't see the question, we'll give somebody else a chance. Randy, just before we go to the
And
first
we
question.
didn't even talk about testing.
That's true. But let's ask, but I am curious, 2018, 2019, how many states do you see using the Common Core tests, and using this Common Core test to make consequential decisions about evaluation and accountability?
Are we talking about 2019, or are we talking about 2016?
2019, say.
I would say that you're going to, and this is a guesstimate. I have no basis for this decision. I would say it will very much depend ideologically on where states are and who's in state legislatures, and whether or not it is ideologically for a governor or a state legislature, whether they see this as a net plus or a net minus. And so in the midterms, we don't know where the midterms will go this year. We don't know where the elections will go in 16 or 18 or 20. I think the better question is, after the census in 20, the better question is what's going to happen in 22. And so I think what happens is that where people think that it's in their interest to argue that the federal government should have no role in education and the Common Core is a conspiracy from the federal government, those states will move away from Common Core, and they will put in other standards which will look very much like the Common Core, but it will not be called the Common Core and things like that. And then they'll have other states that will stick to it. I suspect states like Montana will stick to it. I suspect states like California will stick to it, because there's been, a lot of effort put in, and there's a trust underlying it. I think the more important question will be, what will the accountability system look like? And frankly, if the accountability system keeps looking like test and punish, and everything kind of conflating down to one test score, that will hasten the demise of the Common Core. I think if the accountability system starts really looking at meaningful other measures of student work like portfolio assessments and project-based learning, I think you'll see, like we see in so many countries outside of the United States, that common standards become an anchor.
So, and just on that, since you just said that, previously you've expressed openness, 4 years ago you expressed openness to exploring value-added metrics. More recently, of course, AFT has said VAM is a sham. So are you and are the AFT open to evaluation and accountability systems that incorporate value-added metrics, or do you think that's a non-starter?
I think what's happened is that the value-added metrics, at least the ones that we've seen today, have not been accurate or reliable, particularly where it comes to teachers who teach at-risk kids. And so if you think about the question I posed when I did my remarks earlier, if the question is, how are we going to help at-risk kids, then what we've seen from the science is that the science actually doesn't work in terms of evaluating teachers who are teaching special needs kids or ELLs.
So is that a no-go on value-added, or is that saying that you lean against, or?
So I'm, at this moment in time, leaning against, fighting it in places like Houston, where we've seen it really be unreliable and very harmful to teachers who, by every other measure, are doing a great job with kids. In other places, if people were using it in terms of what I've seen in LA, is that if people are using it for as one factor in terms of the evaluation of schools, where it becomes much more, where you're looking at much more of the aggregate data and a point of information, it looks like it can be a useful point.
So right now, you're okay with value-added as one component of school accountability, but not for individual teacher accountability?
So the answer is pretty much, looks like it can be a part of school accountability. It looks like from the evidence we have right now, that it is more reliable when you have a greater number of people. From the evidence that we have right now, it is not reliable when it is used for individual teachers. That doesn't mean that having things like looking at student work in terms of teacher accountability, I think you have to ask the following three questions in terms of teacher accountability. Were teachers given the tools and conditions they need to do their jobs? Number two, have I, as an individual teacher, taught it? And number three, have kids learned it? And so there are lots of different measures in terms of kids learning, but this trying to force everything into an algorithm or into a test score has not worked, and we shouldn't use it at the moment.
Okay. Max.
Hi, my name's Dave Price, and as I look around the room, I think I spent more years teaching in New Jersey than the average age of people here, and continue doing that consulting both in DC schools and Syracuse schools. And this is a question, Randy, that troubles me, and maybe you can give me an answer. You know, we talk about America being one people, but as I do my work, I really do see two schools, those that do well and those that don't do so well, basically in general around poor areas, poverty, certainly economics. So when we have these discussions in education, it just strikes me sometime that we talk about this American education system as a whole. And I don't really, I mean, I might be mistaken, but I don't really see it as a whole. I see schools that are functioning well and not. So my question to you, Randy, is this. Do you see that as a real position? We know that one solution won't fit all, but should we be looking at the schools that are really in trouble and focusing there right now? We have college graduates in this room. One last statement, I'll get done. Walk with me to Dunbar High School, not the same.
So look, I was on a panel yesterday, a philanthropy panel, with Arnie Duncan and Governor Andrew Cuomo and Kaya Henderson. And even Governor Cuomo said very bluntly, we have two school systems, we have a school system for the rich and we have a school system for everybody else. And I do think that the issue about poverty and segregation and the effects of all of that are very much dispositive in terms of children's lives, which is part of the reason why I say I start thinking about how we try to disrupt what is the natural traction or the natural trajectory of demography and geography. And so the reason I just picked this up is that this was a remarkable report. It's sitting on people's desks right now. It's called for each and every child. It was a report to the Secretary of Education. It was a consensus report from people the likes of Eric Hanishek to Dennis Van Rokel and myself, Katie Haycock to Linda Darling-Hammond. And the fact that this actually should have had the potential to inform the strategies that help turn around outcomes for kids who are at risk, and it's sitting on people's desks and nothing is moving, and instead we're having a debate about GARA. That's part of the problem of where our debate has gone.
Okay, Mike?
I have a question from Twitter here. You mentioned earlier higher education. Is the AFT doing anything to promote universal pre-K?
Yes.
All right.
I will tweet that back to them.
I mean, we're like every day we talk, that's why I said earlier, we believe in universal pre-K. We also believe in all-day pre-K because think about parents. You know, when you have the half-day programs, how are parents who are working going to get their kids to and from pre-kindergarten? So we need to, part of what our strategy is here is that's why we're thinking about how you make schools the hubs of community and how you deal with the needs that parents have, kids, families, communities. But pre-K, very important for lots of different reasons. There is a great American Educator magazine that's just out, that talks about, you know, what happens with words and how important words are and things like that.
Randy, on that point, if a governor asks you and says, hey, I really want to do pre-K, but as you alluded to, there's only so many dollars to go around, how do they weigh kind of that extra dollar for investing in pre-K versus investing in K-12?
Well, I think so Governor Cuomo actually had that, Governor Cuomo and Mayor de Blasio actually had that fight in New York this year. And what happened was they found additional funding for pre-K, and they found additional funding for K-12.
So the answer is
So
more.
the answer
both.
is, well, but the answer is also, pre-K became and is the priority in New York State right now. And it is a vexing, I think it is a vexing question, Rick, because I think if you have a child who's in 11th grade right now, and you tell that child's parent, not a child anymore, a teenager, that we're just going to invest in pre-K, how do you do that to that child? And so I think it becomes one where the strategies, funding has to follow the strategies in terms of what funding do we need to provide, an equitable education for all kids, but what are the strategies that are going to be funded today?
Okay. Max?
You talked about teacher quality, and you were just talking
Oh,
about...
please introduce yourself.
Sorry, Rob Lippincott from I2 Capital. You were just talking about teacher quality and in fact, teacher and early childhood. What's the role of the union, and what's your opinion of teacher preparation and teacher licensure? If we started at a higher bar, would that help?
So we proposed last year to treat teacher preparation like we treat medical preparation. And we didn't say you have, we suggested that we actually have a bar-like exam before teachers actually entered into classrooms. And that exam would have several components, not just the content knowledge, which is really important, both your subject matter, but also the pedagogical tricks of the trade, and also a deep knowledge of student psychology. But what's probably more important than any of that is clinical training. Because I don't care how much you know by studying the books, engaging with kids and figuring out how you do that and what happens in real time, that is the hardest thing for most of us to master. And most of us, if we're honest, will tell you we're a lot better the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth year than we ever were the first year. And so if we actually did some of that work where we required it, not just an hour or two of student teaching, but real requirements before somebody walked in as the teacher of record, that would be really important. And we do that in medicine, but we don't do that in education.
I think membership requirements of the union.
So, you mean a membership requirement to pass this? That's an interesting question. You know, in the trades, it is one of the requirements. And so it is an interesting question to ask. I think we have, you know, we have a duty of representation. And so we need to observe that. And we need to actually help all teachers. But, you know, it may be, and I haven't actually thought about this, there may be different membership levels, just like we now have associate members. So that may be something we may want to do. And last thing I'll say is, it doesn't stop day one. These residency programs, internship programs, Catherine has done some of them. I know that we've seen some of them in other places as well. They're really important to have in terms of the long-term induction of new teachers.
All right, last question, sir. Oh, Max?
Thanks. I'm Abby McCartney. I'm at the National Governors Association, and I used to be a high school math teacher. And at my school, it seemed like there was a real kind of generational divide among teachers. The younger teachers seemed to be more comfortable with things like using student growth and evaluations. Last in, first out was certainly an issue that there was some divide there. And I'm curious if you see that within your membership, and if you see the direction that teachers' unions are going in the future affected by that kind of generational disagreement.
Look, there's always a generational divide. You know, when I first started, you saw the generational, so, you know, the generation of experienced teachers now were new teachers then. I think the best schools are the ones that kind of combine the enthusiasm of youth and the sagaciousness of those who are experienced. And when you have both, and when people are working together, you actually have a pretty great environment. So I think it's, one has to deeply respect both. And you know, I often tell more experienced teachers that when they, you know, tell less experienced teachers to, you know, basically, you know, tell stories about what they had or didn't have, that's actually not meeting a less experienced teacher as the person he or she is. So I think you have to start with an environment that's deeply respectful of, you know, what everybody brings, and then have the joy of actually learning from each other. The bigger issue, frankly, in terms of new teachers, is the difference in terms of view of how they look at the economy, the sharing economy, as opposed to